have a regular Android phone, then clearly you have no privacy. Most of the spying and surveillance on our lives are done on these phones.
Android just doesn't work for me anymore on many different levels, and that sucks.
For over a decade, the smartphone market was a closed argument. Apple owned the premium end, Google owned everything else. Two companies, two ecosystems, zero serious competition. Anyone who suggested a third path was possible got politely dismissed as a hobbyist with unrealistic ambitions. That dismissal made sense for a long time, and then 2026 arrived and the dismissal stopped making sense.
You know, there's been a lot of talk recently about people installing Linux on their computers to get away from Windows and Mac.
Linux phones are no longer a thought experiment. They are real devices in real hands running real software, doing real work. And the implications of that fact are landing in boardrooms, government offices, and developer communities in ways that the mobile industry's two dominant players have no clean answer to. To understand why this moment is significant, start with Bill Gates and the admission he has made publicly on multiple occasions. He called missing Android the single biggest mistake of his career. Not a small mistake, not a strategic miscalculation, the biggest one. Microsoft, the company that defined personal computing for 30 years, that crushed every competitor it took seriously, completely failed to see that the phone was going to become the primary computing device for most of humanity. Windows Phone launched. It burned billions. It attracted almost no developer support. It died without leaving a meaningful mark on the market. Google built its mobile empire on the Linux foundation while Microsoft watched from the sideline. The savage irony running through 2026 is that the technology now threatening the mobile order that humiliated Microsoft is built on the same Linux roots. The open source world that Microsoft spent years treating as an enemy is now the most dangerous force in the industry that replaced them. What made smartphones the most powerful consumer technology products ever built also made them the most powerful surveillance infrastructure ever deployed. It is not a coincidence. The phone in your pocket knows your location with a precision that would have required a dedicated intelligence operation to replicate 30 years ago. It knows your spending patterns, your communication networks, your health rhythms, your sleep schedule, and through AI behavioral modeling, it increasingly predicts what you are going to do before you do it. That data does not sit quietly on your device. It flows continuously into advertising systems, data broker pipelines, platform analytics engines, and in various jurisdictions, government databases. Apple and Google did not just build operating systems. They built the most efficient personal data collection infrastructure in human history and convinced people to pay for the privilege of being surveilled by wrapping it in genuinely excellent hardware. Linux phones attack this structure at the foundation. Devices like the Librem 5 from Purism, the Pine phone and handsets running Ubuntu Touch, Postmarket OS, and Sailfish OS are not simply different products competing on specs. They represent a completely different answer to the question of what a phone is for. There is no Google account required at setup. There is no Apple ID tethering the device to a corporate identity layer. The software stack is open, auditable, and modifiable. No company controls what runs on it. No platform extracts a commission from every transaction that passes through it. No algorithm is optimizing the user experience toward engagement metrics that serve an advertiser rather than the person holding the phone. The hardware design of the Librem 5 makes this philosophy physical rather than theoretical. Physical kill switches built directly into the chassis cut power to the camera, the microphone, the Wi-Fi radio, and the cellular modem. This is not a software toggle that sends an instruction to an operating system that could theoretically be compromised. This is a hardware switch that physically severs the power connection. The boundary is enforced at the silicon level. When Apple says your camera is off, you are trusting software. When a Librem 5 switch is flipped, physics enforces the boundary. That distinction is not a marketing talking point. It is a fundamentally different security architecture, and it is the kind of difference that matters to every compliance-heavy industry, every government procurement office, and every user who has spent time thinking seriously about what modern phone hardware actually does. What changed in 2026 compared to every previous Linux phone moment is the functional baseline. Early Linux phones were proof-of-concept devices, fascinating to enthusiasts, impractical for daily use. Phone calls were unreliable. App support was sparse. The camera experience was frustrating. Basic smartphone functions that Android and iOS had refined over years were rough around the edges in ways that made daily adoption a genuine sacrifice. That era is finished. Calling, messaging, mobile browsing, media playback, navigation, and camera functionality all work on current Linux mobile platforms. The platform no longer needs to prove it can function as a phone. The conversation has moved entirely to what Linux phones enable that Android and iPhone structurally cannot deliver. Terminal access is one of the sharpest examples of this gap. A Linux phone is not running a simplified mobile operating system with a few developer hooks bolted onto the side. It is running actual Linux, SSH into a remote server from your pocket, run scripts, access the full file system, use the device as a genuine computing environment rather than a managed appliance designed around content consumption. Dock it to a monitor, keyboard, and mouse, and it becomes a functional desktop. One device, one operating system, full mobile capability untethered, full desktop capability when connected. Microsoft chased this exact vision with Windows 10 Mobile's Continuum feature and failed entirely before Windows Phone collapsed. The Linux mobile ecosystem kept building toward it without the pressure of quarterly earnings cycles. In 2026 it works. Waydroid closes the argument that killed every previous third mobile ecosystem. The app gap destroyed Palm. It destroyed Windows Phone. It destroyed BlackBerry's attempted software pivot. Every time a new mobile platform showed genuine promise, the absence of the apps people already depended on ended the conversation before it could gain momentum. Waydroid runs a containerized Android environment inside Linux. This is not emulation with crippling performance overhead. This is Android's application layer running as a contained process inside a Linux system. The Linux core retains its open architecture, its privacy model, its terminal access, and its ownership philosophy. The user gains access to the Android application catalog that previously made the platform impractical for mainstream adoption. The app gap argument no longer lands the way it used to. The repairability dimension adds an economic layer that mainstream coverage consistently undervalues. Apple and Samsung spent a decade engineering devices that are sealed, good, and beautiful. They are also largely irreparable without expensive proprietary tools and manufacturer cooperation that is frequently withheld. The average smartphone replacement cycle in most Western markets is under 3 years, and that cycle is not driven purely by consumer desire. It is engineered through batteries that cannot be swapped, screens that cost nearly as much to replace as a new device, and software support windows that expire and leave older hardware vulnerable to security threats. Linux phones operate on the opposite principle: replaceable batteries, modular components, community software support that can outlast any corporate roadmap. A device the user can maintain is a device the user actually owns, and that distinction carries economic weight that compounds over time. The developer economics fueling the App Store wars amplify all of this. Epic Games took Apple to court over the 30% commission. Spotify spent years lobbying regulators across Europe and the United States over the same structural issue. The EU's Digital Markets Act forced Apple to permit alternative app stores in European markets for the first time in iPhone history. These battles reveal a fundamental tension that has been building for a decade between platform power and developer autonomy. Linux phones offer the most complete resolution to that tension currently available. No mandatory store, no commission structure, no approval bottleneck, no single corporation with veto power over which software is permitted to exist on the platform. Independent developers and open source creators are paying attention in growing numbers. Digital sovereignty extends this story far beyond individual consumer choices. Governments across Europe, Asia, and South America are actively evaluating alternatives to mobile infrastructure that is entirely controlled by American corporations. The vulnerability is concrete. Google has demonstrated willingness to leverage Android licensing access as a geopolitical instrument. A country whose smartphone ecosystem depends entirely on continued Google cooperation is a country with a meaningful national security exposure. A Linux-based mobile stack that governments and enterprises can audit, modify, and control locally is not a curiosity. It is a strategic asset. Sailfish OS from the Finnish company Jolla has been building toward exactly this positioning for years, working with government and enterprise clients who need mobile operating systems outside the Google and Apple dependency chain. The procurement conversations happening in 2026 are more serious than anything that came before them. The AI acceleration of the past 2 years makes the privacy stakes dramatically higher rather than lower. Phones are becoming AI terminals. On-device models are processing voice inputs, images, behavioral patterns, and deeply personal data in real time. Cloud AI pipelines are pulling more intimate information off devices than any previous generation of applications. The data flows involved in AI-powered phone features are larger and more sensitive than anything that existed 5 years ago. Closed ecosystems running opaque AI pipelines over that data represent a surveillance and profiling capability without meaningful historical precedent. Local AI models running on open hardware with user-controlled data boundaries are the only configuration in which the user maintains any real understanding of what is happening to their information. Linux phones are the only mobile platform currently architected to support that configuration. The real threat Linux phones pose to Apple and Google in 2026 is not visible in market share statistics. Linux phones hold a fraction of a percent of global smartphone volume. The threat is structural and it is ideological. Linux phones demonstrate in hardware and software that anyone can purchase and use today, that none of the constraints of the existing mobile order are technically necessary. App stores do not have to be locked. Phones do not have to be sealed. Users do not have to accept continuous surveillance as the price of a capable device. Operating systems do not require a corporate owner to function, improve, and remain secure over time. Every developer who encounters this reality recalibrates their understanding of what they surrendered when they accepted the existing terms. Every enterprise that starts asking procurement questions shifts the direction of the conversation. Every government that begins evaluating Linux mobile stacks adds institutional weight to an alternative that was easy to dismiss when it existed only in theory. The phones are real, the software works, the locks on the existing system are now visible to audiences they were never visible to before. Bill Gates missed Android and called it the greatest mistake of his career. The disruption building in 2026 is rooted in the same open source foundation that powered the platform that replaced him. That is not just irony, that is a signal about where the next decade of mobile computing is heading. And the people who built their empires on keeping that direction from becoming possible are running out of time to find an answer.